Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Liv Inspired podcast. And before you continue on, I'd like to give some context and a bit of a trigger warning. This conversation contains topics that include infant loss, extreme prematurity, the age of viability, what it's like to be a NICU parent. And these are heavy, heavy conversations. And if you're somebody who has experienced neonatal loss or pregnancy loss, this might not be the right conversation for you today, and that's okay. I completely empathize with that, as at the time of editing and posting this episode, I'm currently 21 weeks pregnant, and hearing this story, even though it has such a positive and happy and incredible ending, it's not easy. It's not easy to think about these topics, and it is such an incredible story. There is so much in here about how to advocate for yourself and your family as patients. And there's so much to be gained, but I just want to add that caveat in there that this might not be the right episode for you today if those are hard topics in your life right now. But regardless of where this finds you, I know that there is so much inspiration here. It's a long episode, but I promise you, you're not going to want to miss it.
Hey, welcome back to the next episode of the Liv Inspired podcast. I don't even know how to introduce this guest. Today's guest is Melissa, and Melissa is an exceptional human being. She is an active duty Navy Nurse Corps officer whom I had the privilege of serving with when I was also in the Navy. Melissa is a maternal child CNS, which is a clinical nurse specialist. Her birth story and her journey into motherhood is absolutely wild. And it is not a conversation that you want to skip. I'm already tearing up. I have my tissues handy. She's at this very moment nursing her beautiful new 3-month-old baby boy, Elliot, which you'll come to find is a miracle in itself. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to Melissa.
Hey, Liv. How are you today?
And I'm good. I almost want to start this conversation where you and I last left off, which I believe was quite some time ago. It's most definitely pre-pandemic. We were getting brunch in Philadelphia. You were in grad school. You were single. You were dating. You may have just met your husband, Tim, around that time. I feel like I remember his name being mentioned. We had just left Okinawa, Japan, where we were both stationed together and had our own series of fun adventures. And I feel like you were just on the verge of all of these amazing things about to happen for you. So take me back to maybe shortly after your wedding and just what was on the horizon for you, what you were excited for when you were starting to think about becoming a mother and dreaming of that whole season.
So, like you said, I met my husband in Philadelphia, and in 2019, after I graduated from grad school, we moved to North Carolina, bought a house together, moved in together, and we're still dating. We got engaged that July. We were so excited to plan our wedding, and then COVID hit. And the loss of everything that you dream of as a kid, wearing that white dress and a big party, and just having all of the most important people in your life share an experience with you as you start a new life with your husband. And we didn't get that. And we knew that we had lived together and we were getting married in 2020 and we were due to move in 2022. And so we really wanted to start our family shortly after we got married. So we ended up getting married with 20 of our closest friends, family, and wedding coordinators. And by the new year, I was pregnant. So it was very exciting. It's something I've always wanted. I've always wanted to be a mom. I've always had felt that I have had a motherly instinct, and I just wanted what I've helped so many other people have. Once I ended up being a labor and delivery nurse, it was just, I want this beautiful birth. I want the things, and I want a baby to call my own, and my own breastfeeding journey, and just all of the things. And little did I know, I got none of it.
That alone is something I really relate to. When you are a labor and delivery nurse and your whole world and your whole dedication as a professional is to helping other people bring forth their families, and especially if you're in a season where you don't have that yourself and you know it's something you want, that alone can be sometimes really isolating and painful. And I'm just curious what it was like for you, given your clinical expertise in the field, having your master's as a maternal child clinical nurse specialist, like being pregnant for the first time.
It was good. It was really good. And I found myself being more interested in clinical practice guidelines and the science behind certain things and all of that jazz because I was now going to experience that in my own way. That was going to happen to me. And so that was something that I was looking forward to. And it was nice because I was seeing all of these first time moms have the experience that they wanted versus the experience that they maybe weren't expecting. And it's mind boggling to be like, what is my labor and delivery going to be like? What is going to go down for me? Am I going to have the nurse curse? Am I going to get this beautiful natural delivery that I wanted? Did my homework, wanted to do hypnobirthing, was going to start classes. And then it all came crashing down. I got a phone call from the detailer saying that the first week of March that I was going to have to move to Cuba and be there by June. Knowing what their clinical capabilities were, it just bursted the bubble. Obviously, like the needs of the Navy, and there was just so much happening so quickly that I didn't even have time to enjoy what was happening.
For context for any of our non-military friends, essentially when you're active duty, yeah, you can maybe put in some preferences for where you want to go and when you want to be there. And there's a lot of things that go into play, but at the end of the day, it is going to be the needs of the Navy. And I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but the orders that they were giving you were unaccompanied, right? So that meant that their intention was for you to be there alone.
So it was up to me. So I could have gone unaccompanied for 12 months or accompanied for 24 months.
Oh,
But I was like, I'm pregnant, so I'm going to end up being accompanied anyway. I might as well take my husband with me. And so that just meant that we were going to be there longer. She tried to get me to go unaccompanied, but I was like, I'm pregnant. So
already accompanied.
I'm already accompanied with not something that I could leave at home. So that was a part of the conversation and just all of the things. So trying to organize an overseas PCS in 3 months with a baby on the way, a husband who had a job, a house that we bought, and 2 cats to a remote island who has not the same capabilities as where I am right now. My first baby, I had some chronic hypertension already diagnosed. And the OB that was a friend of mine that was in Cuba told me that if at any point I got put on medications for my blood pressure, I couldn't come because they couldn't support me and the potential complications that I would have with my baby. And so it was like playing Russian roulette every day. What's my blood pressure today? And is today the day that all of my stuff is going to be on the way to Cuba? And I don't get to go.
Yeah. Also, for context, once you get that ball rolling and your entire home is packed up, it's like on a cargo ship on its way to Cuba.
Yes.
So either way, you're in a weird situation because had you shipped your things, had you been at that, had it been the day that your movers came and then the next day you have high blood pressure and needing to go on labetalol, like you have no furniture in your home. Like it's
Nothing.
months to get that stuff back.
So we sold our house. We had to have an online baby shower and everything shipped to our house so that it would be packed up to go because they didn't have anything for us. It was just crazy.
Setting a scene for a very stressful time.
It was very stressful, and when you already have high blood pressure, for those who, have ever had a baby, being under a lot of duress is not helpful for that. So, trying to remain calm and collected during this was just not great. So, my daughter Charlotte is the baby I was pregnant with, and I think she just knew we couldn't do this. We just couldn't be a healthy pregnancy and go through all of this stress. So at 18 weeks and 6 days pregnant, I went to the bathroom and had some bright red vaginal bleeding and went to the ER. Sat in the ER waiting room for 2 hours, complaining about of a nine out of 10 pain. My blood pressure was 160 over 90, bright red vaginal bleeding, and I sat in the waiting room for 2 hours. And just my pain kept getting worse. And this may be a little morbid, but I told my husband, I said, I think I'm abrupting and I think we're going to have that baby because I was going from just constant pain to contraction. And I knew that there was a difference. Like I felt the wave. I was sitting in the waiting room crying. And finally, my midwife called the OB and was like, she's not 20 weeks, but she needs to be seen. And so I left the ER without being seen and I went up to labor and delivery and they got me in a room in triage and the midwife did a speculum exam and she was like, "So you're 3 with a bulging bag." Just like that. And I was like, "I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, what?" So I immediately requested for the OB to come into the room and he did and he looked and he was like, "So it looks like you're 3 centimeters dilated with a bulging bag. So we're gonna get you admitted and we're gonna do all of the things and try and keep you pregnant for the night. And we're gonna go to the OR in the morning and try and do an exam indicated rescue cerclage."
Oh, for a lot of people listening, I would say in most facilities that I've worked at, if you are less than 20 weeks pregnant, you typically will not be seen on labor and delivery for any complications. You'll come into the ER. And I love my ER counterparts, but there is like I don't know, like labor and delivery and ER. Like, I don't want to receive an adult having a heart attack on labor and delivery. The ER does not want to receive a pregnant person doing anything. So it's always this like back and forth thing. And as soon as you're 20 weeks, they're like, oh my gosh, go right up to L&D. And this is one of those really unfortunate gray area scenarios that
Gross.
totally indicated labor and delivery triage case. This is our bread and butter. But because of the gestational age that you were at, I just can't imagine, Melissa, knowing what you know is almost scarier
It was.
because I can imagine how helpless you felt. Placental abruption, too, for context, if you're already in the setting of high blood pressure, and it sounds like Melissa's blood pressure was a severe range high blood pressure, the risk of the placenta shearing off of the uterus causing a placental abruption is much higher. And so knowing that, knowing what the signs are, what the symptoms are, in having bright red vaginal bleeding, having abdominal painful contractions, oh my gosh, I just can't imagine sitting there and just hoping that somebody sees you and takes you seriously. Thank God that you talked to your midwife and people made an exception to have you come up because what she described is they do a speculum exam and find out that she's 3 centimeters dilated and her bag of water is just like ready to burst. That could have happened at any moment in the ER while you were sitting there.
And then it would have been over. And I don't take that for granted. Like at any moment I'm gonna have a baby in this waiting room. I kept thinking that every time I felt a gush, uh, I was having a baby. Like that's how painful it was and that's how scared I was. And doing it all the time and being a part of those obstetric emergencies they don't mentally prepare you for it to happen to you. That fear didn't compare at all to the fear that took over me as soon as I got to labor and delivery and they told me what was happening. because I just knew that every single minute was a blessing. And at that point in time, I didn't think that it could get any worse. And then it did. And the next morning, I stayed pregnant all night. I was on my head for most of the night. They put in a Foley and I couldn't get up out of bed. And then I went to the OR. And by the time I was in the OR, I was like almost 5 centimeters dilated. And they tried to get my bag of water back through my cervix. And when they did that, my water broke. So I was under general anesthesia because they didn't feel comfortable doing a side lying spinal or sitting me up. They wanted me just like completely out. And when I woke up, there was just the CRNA, the nurse anesthetist in the room. And I was like, how did it go? And he goes, the doctor will let you know how it went when we get back to your room. And I knew that something was wrong because nobody was in there. It was just the CRNA, and when we got back to the room, everybody was crying.
And this is your workplace.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a whole other component. This is your family.
I knew these people.
Yeah.
My friend was in the OR with me, and so I got back to the room and they told me, and then that whole wave of emotions of pretty much, this is over and we are losing this baby was awful.
So what
It
they
was
had tried
awful.
to do was to do a cerclage, right? So they were trying to take basically a stitch essentially and bring your cervix closed again.
Yeah. So just to keep her in there.
Yeah.
So after my water broke, like she still had a heartbeat. I wasn't contracting anymore and everything looked stable, but the clock had started. Whether or not I went into labor, I got infected, or she passed away, those all were things that were going to end this journey that I was so excited to be on. And it was every minute of every day was stressful because I knew how quickly it could turn. Oh, this one little pinch I had. Oh, am I infective? And am I going to spike a fever? Do we still have a heartbeat? Am I starting to contract? And this is just how it's going to go down. And they wanted to send me home and wait for something to happen. And if it didn't happen, then I would get admitted for viability. But that came with its own separate thing because we had to decide what viability meant to us. And so if it was 22 weeks, we would go to a level 4 and I would get transferred at 21 and 5. And if it was 23 weeks, then I would get transferred at 22 and 5. And so before all of this really went down, my husband and I had that conversation. I knew what the chances of having a healthy, mentally sound, functional baby was. And I told him the viability was 23 weeks. When you have to make that decision, you rationally know what is best, but emotionally, you're like, whatever. Viability is as soon as I can get it. And so that was really hard. And wrapping my head around the fact that if I delivered in that week, we were just going to watch her die really was a mind game that nobody could talk sense into me about. Because all of this physical stuff was happening. And then emotionally, trying to keep this baby alive in your belly, like it's happening to you, right? You're not watching it happen. It's happening to you. And you just have to like be as rational as possible, but you have these moments of irrational thoughts that you cannot control. I just couldn't control it. And so I ended up sitting in a hospital bed for 42 days.
42 days.
40
Before you
days.
got transferred?
So 27 at the Naval Hospital, and then I got transferred for viability, and I made it 15 days on their antepartum floor.
You end up getting transferred when you were 21 weeks and 5 days.
My husband and I really thought about it and talked about it, and viability was 23 weeks for us. And so the hospital that would have taken us at 22 weeks was 2.5 hours away from our house. and 23-week viability hospital was an hour and a half. And so either way, it wasn't great, but we had to pick, and being 2.5 hours away from our house just really seemed impossible. And so I got transferred at 22 and 5 to the hospital that was an hour and a half away from our house.
What are some of the things, even before you were transferred, in those 27 days of just waiting, like, what pulled you through? Like, how did you get through each day? Did you start to develop a routine? Were there any things looking back that were like, wow, if not for that, I wouldn't have made it?
So it was in the thick of COVID, and so the visitor policy was basically non-existent, but I had such support of my coworkers that they came and saw me, and it just that got me through, like, knowing that people were coming to see me, even though we were in a time that, like, you couldn't do that. They were bringing me coffee, I was playing puzzles, I made a deal with myself that I was going to, like, do something every day to take care of myself. Whether it was I just put on makeup or I braided my hair. And eventually I started showering once like every four or so days because I just had to get out of bed. And being clean was hopefully going to help prevent me from getting infected. And so it was just like this back and forth, like how much can I be out of bed versus going to the bathroom and showering and doing all of that jazz. And so I started doing my hair and my makeup, and I was sitting in bed 20 hours a day.
I know because I have been the nurse for so many people in this situation. Most people like can't even wrap their head around what that means. Like you mentioned casually the day after all this happened that you were on your head. Like Melissa was laying with her head slanted down and her feet in the air so that gravity would not affect this baby
Coming
literally
in.
physically coming any closer to the outside. So it is, I can imagine just taking a shower for the first time. That had to be terrifying.
Oh, it was. Oh,
Terrifying. Like every single thing, do I sit up to eat food? Every
uh-huh.
single decision that you make in your day, you could be thinking like, is this the thing that caused
Yep.
wow.
And that's the mind game, right? That's the mind game is if I take this chance, what are going to be the repercussions? Or am I going to be fine? It was roulette every single day. And finally, I just told myself, whatever is going to happen is going to happen. And I think I told myself so many times, and to this day, I knew she was going to make it. I knew it. There
You
was
had that
something
feeling.
in my soul
And
that she was going to make it. She was going to make it. She was going to live. And she was going to be the best thing. And how she got here was just going to be part of our story. And if I didn't believe it then, I wouldn't have believed it now. And I think that is what got me through was that I just knew it.
yeah.
People tried to talk me into doing lots of things that I just said, no. I said, she's going to be all right. She's going to be all right. And I'm going to fight for her. And that's exactly what happened and exactly what I did. And I am unapologetically certain that I made the right decisions.
There's so much advocacy in your story. And it makes me really emotional because that really started for you when you were sitting in the ER. And I think people really need to hear that. It's easy because Melissa and I are both healthcare professionals and we know the nuances of the system. But regardless of your education and your background, if you have a knowing and you have a gut feeling that something isn't right, you don't need to ask for anyone's permission to
Mhm.
advocate for yourself. It is a moment in that ER nurse, the OB, whatever, it is a moment in their career. This is your life. You know, these decisions are your life. Yes, maybe you'll ruffle some feathers or people won't agree with your decision making, but it's always your right to ask for a second opinion to get more information. And that is so important.
a lot of things unfolded. And at one point, I'm a pretty outspoken person, and that's just who I am and who I am okay being, right? And so at one point, the nurse manager of the NICU sat in my room and said, "You make my nurses feel like they don't take good enough care of your daughter. And I can't make my nurses take care of Charlotte because they don't want to deal with you." And I looked at her and I said, "How your nurses feel is not my responsibility. I am here to make sure that they do take good care of my daughter. And if I don't feel like they are, then they probably aren't. And to put that on me is irresponsible." I don't think that any person in leadership should ever walk into a patient's room and put that on them. And that is something that I learned being a NICU mom. I didn't care how people felt. I knew my daughter because I spent anywhere between 16 and 20 hours with her every single day for 156 days. I knew her better than any single nurse would have known her combined. And so when they weren't listening to me, I didn't care how it came off or how it sounded. Like, I was going to get the answers I wanted because she was my life. She was something that I had spent 42 days sitting in a hospital bed wanting, and I was not going to give up without a fight. And if she couldn't do it, who was going to do it for her? And that is what made me get out of bed every day. It was a certain level of hell to watch them bag your daughter, watch her turn blue, listen to them tell you that she had probably less than a 1% chance of ever living a normal life. I didn't know that I was ever going to bring her home for 156 days. And you can't believe it until you actually walk out the door. That's the reality of being a NICU mom, no matter what you're in the NICU for. And I just had to tell myself that it wasn't about me. It was about her. Whatever we were doing had to be in the best interest of her.
Wow. There's so much there. And for me personally, I started my career as a pediatric nurse, and I was never a NICU nurse. I was so young too when I was a pediatric nurse, but right away I started to learn the dynamics of and the intricacies of taking care of children, especially children with chronic illnesses whose parents are so well versed in their care. And you're in this strange position because you're like, okay, I'm the RN and I know these protocols and these are the orders. And then you have the parent who truly is a subject matter expert, maybe not in that disease process, but in their child they are. And that is something that, like, regardless of someone's, again, educational background or anything, that really has to be taken into consideration because that is the person that spends the most amount of time with that child and knows exactly when something's not right. And it should be so much more of a collaboration. And when you have a quote unquote like difficult family or a strong mom, especially who's a nurse, I can imagine being really intimidated to take care of your daughter. But at the same time, that's how you grow as a professional. If you can't collaborate with somebody and if you can't remove your feelings and your pride from it and just be like, okay, she's not crazy. She has been through hell to meet this baby. And if she truly is feeling that there is something going on, let me change my perspective for a second and just look at this objectively and see how she's right instead of just convincing myself how she's wrong. And that happens all the time in labor and delivery too. Like
All the
I
time.
can't tell you time people are giving assignments and they're like, I will not take care of this lady in room 4 because she is crazy. She's refusing the monitor. She's refusing this. She's refusing that. And she's fired all these nurses and she doesn't want anybody to check her cervix and whatever it is. She's got a 6-page notarized birth plan. And you're like, okay. And I'll step in because what's underneath all of that is fear and someone who's just trying to figure out how to advocate for themselves because they're scared shitless. And
Yep.
most of the time, almost every single time, it ends up being great because you just have to step into it with them and understand that they're really feeling this power dynamic and they're not feeling heard and they're not feeling represented and they have these goals and these expectations and these dreams and everything has shifted and the only way they know how to respond is to push back when it creates all of this resistance where if you change your perspective as the caregiver, as the nurse or the provider, and you're like, okay, in what ways can she be right? Maybe we don't need all of these interventions. Maybe we can meet in the middle. Maybe there's another way forward and we can all find.
And I have a perfect example of that, actually. So they were doing heel sticks on Charlotte for blood gases all the time. Q4, Q6, Q12, just so many pokes. And finally, I was like, if you draw this lab right now, are you doing anything about it based on the result? They were like, no, we'll watch it overnight. And I said, then you're not poking her. For your own information, if you are not taking any action about it, and her vitals were stable, her oxygen requirements were fine, she was intubated, I was like, then you're not doing it. And everybody was mad. And I was like, but look at it. Just because she can't tell you that hurts doesn't mean you get to do it anyway. And that happened to us at a different hospital. After she got her heart fixed, she was really sick. And I knew that she was a hard poke because they had a difficult time putting her PICC line in. And they had pulled it because they extubated her, but then she tanked and had to be reintubated. And I asked them, I said, she's a pretty difficult stick. She goes through IVs, like she goes through diapers. And at what point will you guys make the decision to put another PICC line in her? And so at this hospital, we couldn't spend the night, even though she was sicker than snot. And I said, please don't poke her any more than twice. And if you have a hard time getting it, call me and we will come back and we will figure out how to facilitate this. They poked her 14 times. 14. I counted 14 holes on my child in less than 12 hours. And I about lost my mind. I was screaming at them. I was like, would you do this to an adult? And they were like, no, they wouldn't let us. And I was like, you're right. So why are you doing this to my 5-pound baby? My 5-pound baby, just because she can't tell you to stop doesn't mean that you get to do whatever you want. And that just set the tone for that whole visit. But people are so objective in I have to get this done that they get tunnel vision as providers. We
Oh,
just need
darn.
to do this. We just need to do this. This is how we're going to have a baby is you go on the monitor, we start your induction, you break your bag of water, and then you get your epidural, and then XYZ happens. And it just doesn't have to be like that. It just doesn't have to be like that. And when Charlotte was at like the main hospital with the NICU, they would do rounds. And I made sure that I was there every day for rounds. That was just my thing, right? I want to know what's going on. I want to know what the plan is. And they rounded every day. And the days that they did rounds without me, I had some things to say about it. I was like, y'all know I'm here. I'm less than 5 minutes away in a hotel. And you know that I don't miss a single day of rounds. Why would you do that without me? And it was just because they didn't want the questions. And I was like, that's unacceptable. I used to say to them, are you taking my baby home or am I? Because if you are not taking her home, you have less to say about this than I do. And I felt that way. I was like, all of these decisions that are being made without me, I have to deal with that at the end of the day. I have to live with that. I have to take her home. And I used to say that, and they used to look at me like, "Oh, you're right." I was like, "I know I'm right. This is my baby. What you do to her affects what is happening when we leave the NICU, whether or not we are leaving the NICU." And so to make those decisions without me is stupid in my but
I think that's a really powerful perspective shift for anybody listening who has ever been a patient or is advocating for a loved one who's a patient is number one, whenever a procedure or even if it's a lab draw, like Melissa said, just ask, how will this information change your management? If someone's really wanting to check your cervix and you don't feel comfortable or whatever it is, just ask, okay, how would this information change your management? And there should be a really clear answer for that. And if there's not, then say, okay, then I'd like to not do that right now at this time. It really is a dance, unfortunately. And sometimes when we create a lot of resistance, then it's almost like the care can get worse because people are humans and nobody wants to feel confronted all the time. And so you just need to foster that collaboration and to help shift the perspective. Hey, I understand that there's these protocols and that this is an evidence-based practice, and I have so much respect for all of that, but it's not individualized. And at the end of the day, I am going to be the primary caregiver, or this is my body. And so I live with this body, or I live with this child and these decisions forever. You don't. So I think those are two really powerful takeaways. And I feel like we missed a huge part of her story. It's her birth. So I'm mad for that. We got transferred
yeah.
to the hospital. You're now at a facility that has a NICU, which again is an important piece of information for anybody who is pregnant or planning to be pregnant, is just know what the facilities in your area can offer. Not all hospitals are created equal, and just knowing like what is offered at which facility can be really critical in your decision making if there is an emergency that's happening.
So agree with that. And just know in your head, like, hey, this is where I want to go. This is in a perfect world. But if there is an emergency, where would I need to go? You may not mean to get all of your care there, but just having that piece of information in your back pocket should you need it. And I was on the antepartum unit, got into a really good routine just because things hadn't been that easy up to this point. Didn't mean that it was about to turn easy now that I was in a new hospital. Most antepartum patients get a PICC line so that they just have access if they need it. And then they can stay in longer. And that's just the practice that they do, which makes a whole lot of sense. And so the vascular access team came to see me the day after I got transferred. I got transferred on a Sunday, and they couldn't find a vein that was big enough in my arms to cannulate. And I just had the veins that they said were maybe, I had nerve bundles, fiber bundles around them. And so they didn't feel comfortable trying to put a pick in me. So I had to go to interventional radiology, and I got a central line put in my IJ, which is in my neck. And it was the most painful thing I had experienced up to that point. So they only gave me 25 micrograms of fentanyl. Huh. And I felt everything. And so they draped my face to get to my neck. And so I was hot and couldn't breathe, and I almost passed out. And it was just like this whole thing. And then where it was on my neck, I like couldn't turn my neck a certain way. And it was awful. And it took me a good week and a half to not be crying every day about how badly it hurt. And I'm not a wimp, but it was just in a very vulnerable spot. And then on top of that, every time they had to do a dressing change, they just stimulated my vagus nerve. And so I almost passed out.
Oh my gosh. I remember when you posted a picture of this line, like you guys, it was just coming
Mhm.
out of her neck, like this
Yeah,
uh,
my whole neck.
an
My whole neck.
my absolute nightmare. I remember like getting nauseous just seeing the picture. I really can't imagine living with that. Like what? Oh my God.
And
Not worth
so
it.
then Yeah, so that was there, and every time I showered, they had to change the dressing because of where it was, it couldn't stay dry. And so, like, that just really took a mental hit because I couldn't shower. I couldn't wash my hair. I couldn't turn my neck. I couldn't bend over because of where it was. It was just really inconvenient while totally rationally knowing why it was there. And I'm so thankful that it was because we ended up meeting it. And so I delivered on a Monday night. The Friday before I delivered, I started contracting. I woke up at 1 a.m. to go to the bathroom and I had straight meconium, which is like a first baby poop in the toilet. And so Charlotte was frank breech over my cervix. And so she was in like a pike position. And so her butt was literally over my cervix. And so she just pooped and it just came out. I still had clear fluid, but I knew that most of the time when you have meconium, it's a sign that baby's distressed in there. And so I knew that my time being pregnant was coming to a close. And I just, from that 1 o'clock bathroom trip on, was on eggshells. And so that afternoon, I started contracting. I was contracting like every 4 minutes, painfully. It was terrible. Preterm contractions are very different than term contractions. And I can attest to that now, and I'll get there. And so my sister-in-law was getting married and we were watching it on Facebook Live. And Tim is holding the phone in one hand and holding my hand in the other. And I looked at him and I was like, I know that your twin sister is getting married right now, but you have got to turn it off. We might be having a 24-week baby right now. I just need you to turn it. And so I got transferred to labor and delivery. I got put on magnesium. I got antibiotics. I got Indocin. I got a second round of betamethasone steroid intramuscular injections in my butt. And just the whole kit and caboodle. Mag is as bad as everybody says it is. And it was just a whirlwind. And so I spent almost 48 hours on labor and delivery. I got there Friday afternoon and I got back to antepartum Sunday evening. And Charlotte tolerated it like a champ. Her fetal heart strip looked great, good variability, not having too many T cells with my contractions. Like, it was good. And so we chilled out Sunday into Monday, and Monday afternoon, I started contracting again. And I just felt icky. I felt like it was happening and it was time. At some point, I knew I had gotten infected, but everything was fine. So I didn't say anything to anybody. And I can say that now because I have a healthy baby. But back then, I was like, I didn't even tell my husband. I didn't have a fever.
We're going to try to deliver you early.
Yep. Yep. I was like, I am not tachycardic. She is not tachycardic. I don't have a fever. Her strip looks good on her NSTs every day. I was like, we're going to keep it going.
You felt like something was different.
Oh, it was green. Like, my discharge was green. It like started to smell and nobody was watching me go to the bathroom. So I was like, until I feel like the infection is causing us harm, we'll just keep going. And we did. And then that was a decision I had to live with, right? Like, I was making that decision. Turns out it was, for me in that moment, the right decision. I obviously don't condone that behavior to anybody else, but that was my conscious decision that I was making.
Yeah, and it was one based on the desperation of, at that point in the game, like, every day counts.
Every day did count.
Every day in utero counts, and it really is not black and white. It's extraordinarily nuanced, even for the OB providers. It's okay. At what point do we call it? And I don't think you made like a terribly reckless decision or anything. The vital signs, everything else was pointing. It was just the beginning signs of, hey,
this is ending.
Yeah.
This is ending. So I started contracting and during day shift, and I was like, I was contracting like every 12 minutes and it was just like crampy. I just felt like it was gonna turn at some point, and it did. So the nurse that I had during the day, she was like, I'm close to retirement and this is my cush job and I don't really care about you, nurse. And so I didn't say anything to her. And Tim was going to the gym at that point because we had to have some sense of normalcy and an outlet. And he asked me if I was okay. And I was like, yeah, I'm just a little crampy. And he was like, I don't have to go to the gym. And I was like, go get dinner, bring dinner back, and then we'll go from there. So they brought sushi back and I ate it standing up because I was so uncomfortable. He was sitting there after dinner just chilling, and I was like, okay, so it's almost shift change. I was like, I need you to go shower because once this goes down, it's going to go down pretty quick. And I just need you to be ready. And I'm not going to say anything until we're ready. And so my favorite night shift nurse came on and I said, I'm about to ruin your night. And she was like, why? And I said, I'm contracting and I'm pretty uncomfortable. And we did the dance of, is this gas or is it contractions? And finally, I looked at her at like almost 9 o'clock and I was like, it's time to go on the monitor. Like, I'm pretty uncomfortable and I'm contracting like every 4 to 5 minutes. And we got on the monitor and Charlotte's strip looked awful. I was contracting every 4 to 5 minutes. She was tachycardic. She was having really big variables with every contraction. And so the resident came in and did a speculum exam, and there wasn't a butt, no feet, no hands, no nothing in my vagina. And I was still only 2 to 3 centimeters dilated. And not even 30 minutes later, the attending came in and I said, it's time to have a baby, isn't it? And she goes, yeah, I don't think that we should wait any longer. And I said, I agree. Let's go. So they put me back on MAG and the labor deck was busy. And so they didn't even take me over to labor and delivery. They just took me to the OR. And so I have a very nice, long, complicated history with anesthesia. And the anesthesiologist that was on that night was really amazing. And she really listened to me. Like, I had all the paperwork of the complications that I had with previous surgeries and whatnot. And so we knew how important it was for me to be awake for delivery. And so she agreed to do a combined spinal epidural. And so we did it. She got a good swirl for the spinal, gave me the epidural, redosed the epidural. They draped me. They got the Doppler out to listen to her heartbeat. And she goes, how are you doing now? And I was like, I'm pretty sure I could still pick my feet up. And I did. And so right as that happened, Charlotte had another big dip in her heart rate. And so the OB was like, I don't really want to wait any longer. And so the anesthesiologist was like, that means putting her to sleep under general anesthesia. And the OB said, do it. And so her heart rate recovered again. And I heard it. And I said, can I say goodnight to my husband? And so they let Tim come in and say goodnight to me. And I later come to find out that he was sitting out in the waiting room for like almost an hour, like over 45 minutes while they were trying to get anesthesia to work. And he walked in and he goes, being difficult, huh? And I said, yep, you know it. I said, they're going to put me to sleep. And he said, okay. And he kissed me goodnight. And the last thing I said to my husband was, don't let her suffer. And so at 24 and 6, I knew that me going under general anesthesia made me put that decision in my husband's hands. And we had talked about it. We had talked about it at length. If they were coding her, if she was on all these pressors and they were doing lines and they just couldn't get her back, let her go. We had talked, and what first time parents should be having that conversation of like, when is enough? And unfortunately, it happens more than we know in places that, all over the United States, all over the world. But we had to have that conversation. Like, we had made it this far, but if she came out not good, we had to let her go. I didn't want her to suffer.
That is like a moment of true surrender for you. It just goes to show you fought so hard. You did everything in your control to
Yep.
get her to that point. You tried a spinal with an epidural. You tried to be awake to continue to be fighting for her. But like in that moment, there was nothing else that you can do but just
Nope.
let go, be put to sleep, and let your sweet husband, who's not a medical professional,
Yeah.
hey, like putting all that faith and trust in, okay, now I'm passing the ball to you. And I trust that I know you're going to make the best decision as her father. And Wow. I can't imagine laying there on the OR table just, okay, I have to let go now.
Yeah. And also, we had the conversation before then. I told him, I said, no matter what decision you make, I will support you because I know that you are going to make the decision you feel is best in that moment. Because how many times do parents make decisions and then hold that against each other? Whether it's a hard decision, life versus death versus, I don't know, what clothes to wear. And I had to let him know that I would support him no matter what decision was made because that's just where we were at. So I woke up in the PACU and I looked to the left and there was the nurse and I looked to the right and there was my husband. And the first thing that he said to me was, she's okay. So she made it out of the OR, intubated. She was born 7 minutes away from being 25 and 0. And let me tell you, the difference between a 24-weeker and a 25-weeker is big. And so I asked the OB, I was like, can we wait until midnight? And she told me no. And then with all of my anesthesia complications, she was born 7 minutes before midnight. And that's still something to this day that I
Yeah, it's just their own little joke. You're like,
I have a feeling about that, but
yeah.
whatever.
Wow. Okay, just to zoom out for a second, Melissa's water broke when she was barely 19 weeks, and she delivered Charlotte at almost
Sweeter.
25 weeks. We'll just say 25 weeks.
Yeah.
7
Six-
minutes shy of 25 weeks. What a freaking journey, you guys. Like,
Yeah, it's pretty insane.
but it doesn't stop there. Here, but now, how many days from the time that she was born was she in the hospital?
156.
156 days.
So between me and Charlotte in 2021, we spent 202 days admitted to the hospital.
Oh.
202 days.
202 days.
It's pretty insane to think about. And every day, you're just in survivor mode. Every day, you don't even have time to really process what's happening because you just have to do it. You have to wake up, you have to go, and you have to do the things. And it's all sort of a blur now, but I took notes every day. And so I read her notebook every once in a while. And I made a post after 156 days of like how many chest x-rays she had and how many intubations she had and how many different modes of oxygen she was on. So because my water broke so early, it causes hypoplastic lung syndrome and bronchopulmonary dysplasia, so BPD, because they don't have the fluid to develop their lungs. And so she had very underdeveloped lungs, and that was our biggest fight. Thankfully, she didn't have any brain bleeds. She didn't have any necrotizing enterocolitis, which was a miracle. We didn't have any ROP, retinopathy of prematurity, which is also a miracle. But her being intubated for 4.5 months was tough. Every time they tried to extubate her, it failed. Every time they tried to go from the oscillator to the conventional vent, something happened. And when they call it a roller coaster, like it really is. You could have 2 good days and then one bad day completely just shatters it. I can't tell you how many times I was crying in the cafeteria, and you have to pick yourself up, put yourself back together, and go back. Everybody in those 156 days told me that I needed to go home and I needed to take a break for myself and I needed to do X, Y, and Z to feel better and be mentally there. And I was like, leaving my baby for any amount of time isn't helping my mental situation, right? I need to be here. This is what's keeping me going. That's a perspective that I knew of myself. Like being an hour and a half away just to come home wasn't going to do anything for me. That was going to stress me out even more. And just because people can say it doesn't mean they totally understand who I was as a person. But I knew myself well enough to know. My husband at some point stopped asking because he was like, I know that you're just going to say no because Charlotte's here. Your heart and soul are here. You can't be an hour and a half away, because what if something happened? I couldn't fathom being that far away and something happening and me not being able to be there. And those were the things that were going through my head. I lived in a hotel, so that was also great. The people at the front desk knew me. Yeah, it was just a roller coaster.
To any NICU parents out there now, or anybody who's in a similar long-term hospitalization situation, I think what you just shared is really important. If sometimes going home doesn't feel better, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does, and that's okay too. Like sometimes you need to be in your space and take a shower and sleep in your own bed and come back. It's so individual.
Mhm.
Okay if you want that, and it's okay if you don't want that. But like, what other pieces of advice would you offer somebody in that situation? Because you built so much resilience. 202 days. You don't get through 202 days in the hospital without some pretty freaking amazing resilience.
Find what works. Like I went back to the hotel every night. That was what worked for me. And there were nights that I didn't leave until 2 o'clock in the morning, and I went back and I was back at the hospital at 7 a.m. There were days that I had to do that, but I left. I got some fresh air. I sat outside. They had rocking chairs outside of the NICU or picnic table. I would sit out there for 5 or 10 minutes, get some sun, and I would go back. That worked for me. At some point, I had to surrender myself. You said that pretty well, to the point of I lost my fight after Charlotte got her heart fixed. So we were in one NICU, got transferred to another NICU so that she could get her heart fixed. And she had a pretty rare complication of that called post PDA occlusion syndrome. And it basically stuns your heart. And so her ejection fraction was terrible. And she was on 2 cardiac meds. She was maxed out on oxygen. She was on 100% FiO2. She was on nitric. She was clamping down and coding 2 or 3 times a day. And after that, I was numb, and I just looked at myself in the mirror one day and was like, if you're not here to fight for her, who will? And I picked myself up off the floor and I went back to the NIC. But you just have to find something that keeps you grounded. I mentioned that I was cricketing when I was inpatient. And I brought that cricket with me into the NICU, and I was making signs, and I was making stickers for all the nurses, and I was making birthday cards, and I was making onesies for Charlotte once she started to wear clothes. And that helped. Just, I was there and I was involved with what was happening, but I also was giving myself a creative outlet to focus on that too. So it was like doing 2 things at once, and I would say that helped put me back together a little bit. So you and lean on your support. There were people who helped us, but it was also like, know yourself, right? I leaned on Tim, my new husband of what, 8 months at that point, and we had a really in-depth conversation about how much we were willing to share with our friends and family. And because, do you want the questions? Do you want all the text messages? Do you want all the phone calls when you tell everybody how awful it is? And when you were that far into it, we didn't want it. We had our third pneumonia, or when we were on CPAP and then had to be reintubated, or when we were dying of heart failure after we got our heart fixed. Like, you just didn't tell anybody, and that was hard.
I remember following parts of your journey too, and you shared moments throughout these 202 days. And I will never forget the picture that you posted of the first time you got to hold her,
Oh, yeah.
your skin. Like, how many days was that? 19 days until you could hold your baby for the first time.
Yeah, and that's not normal, right? People think that 5 seconds is too long, right?
Yeah.
19 days.
19 days. Yeah. And so I would love to talk about Charlotte now.
Okay.
So, what has these past 4, she's
Almost 4.
4. Who is Charlotte?
Amazing. So when we came home from the NICU, she got a G-tube, she was on oxygen, and that was we had to learn to be new parents to a medically complex kid. Lots of appointments. It was in the middle of flu and RSV season, and so we didn't go anywhere. It was still COVID, but my husband would go to the grocery store and come home and shower. Like, he took his clothes off in the garage and then got in the shower when he came home because we were so afraid of her getting sick. And so that came with its own things. And then they tried to get me to go back to work, and I didn't have any home help because it was the holidays. And so finding a nurse to take care of this baby that I just worked so hard to try and get home was really difficult. And so work was amazing, and they let me work from home for a little bit just until we got home health established. And then finally they were like, you have to come back. And I was like, I have to come back. You're right. You're right. I do. And we were in a really good place then. And so I went back to work, and that was all jazz. But like, the work didn't stop. It was occupational therapy, physical therapy, feeding therapy, speech therapy. She was on a G tube, and so getting her onto bottles and eating and weight gain and breathing and all of these things. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of work that was put on me, and we just did it. And so we spent a lot of time making sure that she met all of her developmental milestones for her adjusted age, mind you, but we did it. We met every single developmental milestone until she was 2. And that is the biggest win that made every single minute worth it. If I knew now what kind of kid she was going to be back then, I would do it again in a heartbeat. You don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know that I could ever make the same decisions I did for her. She runs around and she's so smart. We just got glasses, and so now she looks smart. She is like talking to a tiny adult. She's my best friend. She's funny. She loves to have a good time and be silly and be outside, and she just go all the time. And we got rid of our G tube, and she eats like a normal 4-year-old. Three and a half. I'm not ready to call her a 4-year-old yet. She's tiny. She's tiny for her age, but she's on her own little growth curve, and she's strong, and that's good. It's good enough for us. Good enough for us. And so we've added a baby brother to the mix.
Yeah. So let's pause there for a second, because how long did it take you to even conceptualize growing
I
your
didn't.
family?
I didn't. I didn't. I told Sam, I said, you're just going to have to make this happen because I will never be ready. I will never be ready to potentially do that again.
Yeah.
And I obviously, I would say overall had a healthy pregnancy. There were a couple things here and there that made it difficult, but I felt good. I felt good for most of it, but around like the 17, 18-week mark, I started having the same pain that I had when I went through everything with Charlotte, and it was terrifying. It's terrifying. What day is this gonna not go away and just be worse? And then it never did. And I made it to 36 and 2 and had a scheduled C-section, and they trialed a different medication on me that set up, and I was numb and I was awake, and I got to do skin to skin with my baby in the OR, and I went home 2 days later, and it was amazing. And I'm breastfeeding.
That is so beautiful and wonderful and wild. And I really want that to sink in for people. Like, you might go through something so insane and crazy. And this has happened to other friends of ours too, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But there is so much redemption in the birth of Elliot. Like, 2 days, just 2 days in the hospital, not 202, just two, just
Just
two.
2.
And just, it's a culmination of all the lessons learned and all the hard things. What a gift that little boy is to your nervous system, and just knowing, okay, things can be hard and they can be hell, but they won't always be like that.
Yeah. And watching Charlotte be a big sister,
Oh,
It heals my heart even more every day because she's
my
like
only
growing to love
answer.
him even more. And I have to say this because I'm just a real person. I don't know that I would feel how I feel now if it was a girl. The fact that I have a boy is also healing because I'm not comparing the two of them.
Yes. That's
And
a really important thing to point out.
you know what? Like,
Come on.
if I had a girl, like, okay, fine, whatever. Like, I would have wrapped my head around it, but it was easier to wrap my head around having a boy because it was different. It was different. And if I had that pain and I was pregnant with another girl, like the PTSD surrounding that probably would have been exponentially worse. And just bringing home a newborn, I was like, what do I do with this? What do I do with this? I don't know anything about this baby. Whereas Charlotte, I knew everything about her and I was ready to bring her home and take care of her and all of those things. And it was just, oh, this is what people,
You're like, wait a second, this is supposed to be way more complicated.
yeah, it was.
Like, what do
I
you
mean,
mean we're going home today? I'm
it
not ready. I haven't.
It wasn't, I wouldn't say it was easy bringing home a
Yeah,
newborn,
it's just a different type of.
but it wasn't as hard as I thought
Yeah.
it would. It was easy to check myself, like, okay, this is normal newborn stuff.
Yeah.
I very rarely was off the deep end. What is happening right now? I can't handle this because Charlotte was hard. It was hard. It was just was emotionally, mentally, and physically hard because every time something happened, every time she cried, she turned blue. Like it was hard. Feeding, she was on such a schedule, but then trying to get her on bottles and all of this jazz. Whereas now I could feed Elliot on the go. Like it's fun. And I am getting ready to go back to work and need to start giving him a bottle. And I'm like really hesitant because we have such a good breastfeeding relationship that it's pretty great, but I'll get there. Mentally, I'll get there.
Yeah. I just
Whereas,
think it's such a beautiful full circle thing. Like we started this conversation. You're breastfeeding this beautiful, chunky, healthy, sweet baby. And then just for people to understand like what it took for you to get there, I think it just highlights you just really never know someone's journey. Like you could just someone could see you out in public feeding your baby and be like, man, must be nice.
yeah,
And they have no idea about the hell that you walked through to get there. For Elliot to have a big sister, to grow up with that, and knowing a little bit of your personal story, like you grew up losing a sibling. And so you know more than anybody how much every day that they share together is incredible.
yeah, it's cherished crown for sure. And that was part of what got me to agree to have another baby was I had a sister and I lost that sister and grew up an only child after that loss, which was overshadowed by her death. And I didn't want Charlotte to grow up like that. And just the things people say when you're an only child, and I know you know what I'm talking. I will never forget. I told somebody because I didn't know how to tell. Like when you first meet somebody and they want to talk about, oh, do you have any brothers or sisters? I didn't know how to answer that question for a lot of my childhood and most of my like young adulthood because it drudges up some memories and you're not quite sure that you want to tell everybody that story if you are just meeting them for the first time. You don't know how it's going to be received or whatnot. So I used to say I was an only child because it's true for the most part. And somebody was like, oh, so you were really spoiled as a kid. That hurts more. That hurts more than
Why are we like this, guys? Like, why do people like these built-in conversations that people
like,
just these responses and you're like, what?
why is that?
Interesting thing to say. What an interesting thing to say. Like,
But
wow.
you should say that to me because no, I was not. I was treated like I had a sibling because I did have a sibling. She just died. And so that made me an only child. And I was 5 when my sister passed away and she was 8. And so I learned from a very young age that, like, you have absolutely no idea what people have gone through to make them who they are now. And maybe that's why I fought so hard for Charlotte, was because I watched my sister die. Like, I wasn't ready to do that. And, like, we're not very religious people, but I used to pray to my sister and I was like, "You can't have her. Leave her here. You can't have her. Leave her here. She belongs down here with me. You can't have her." And at one point she listened and she let her come and she let her stay with me, which is also a really interesting story. So my sister's birthday was on the 27th of January, and so 127 is her birthday. And interestingly enough, there were 27s everywhere. So she was born 7 minutes to midnight, which is 127. I spent 27 days on labor and delivery at the first hospital, the antepartum. Her birthday is 6/7/21, so backwards is 127. I would have been on the 27th of June, I would have been in my 27th week of pregnancy. I just didn't make it that far. And there were other coincidences too, and we're obviously, like, looking for those coincidences, but they were there on days that we were just having a connective moment, like, her heart rate would have been 127, just, like, things like that. And so I really feel my sister took care of us and let her stay here because she knew that she was bound to do something great. And I think that she will. I think that she is destined to do something great in this world, whether it's be a biomedical engineer for something related to kids with BPD or intubated babies, or be a neonatologist, or be a nurse, or, like, the compassion and the empathy that this kid has is insane. Like, when other people cry, she cries, and she just is so in tune with her emotion that it's really interesting to see, like, how connected she is to other people. I have family members that are pretty sick, and she's 3.5. Like, how many 3.5-year-olds understand something like that? And she does. She just gets it. She knows that there is something medically wrong with them, and she is very gentle, and she just changes her whole demeanor when she's around them to be very nurturing, and she talks about them and she just loves them, and without really understanding the severity of it. And it's just really amazing to watch.
I hope that one day she either listens to this or you write a book or something. And I think for her to look back at everything you guys did to make her possible, to give her that chance, whatever she decides to do with her precious life, that is going to be such an incredible moment for her. He will
I
never
think
have any doubt that she had
no,
the exact parents that she needed. And I believe that to be true.
I do too.
Or there's a reason that she chose you.
And I also think that it's just really interesting because she remembers things very crazily, right? We'll have a conversation and a couple weeks later, she'll bring it up and be like, "Remember when?" And I was like, "What? Yes, I remember. Do you remember?" And she'll whip it out. And I'm like, "Yeah, that's exactly what happened and who we were with and whatever." And we have pictures of her intubated on oxygen and things like that. And when we show her pictures of when she was in the hospital, she gets really somber, and I was like, "Do you remember when you were really sick and people had to take care of you? And did you know that mommy and daddy were there and we loved you?" She was like, "Yeah." And she'll just randomly say something relating to when she was in the hospital or needed help breathing or things like that. And it's just, I wonder if even when she, like, starts to remember things, if she'll still remember certain things about that. Yeah. I'm waiting for her to say something profound. "Oh, I talked to Auntie Steph," or because we have pictures of my sister and we talk about her often. And so I wonder if maybe one day.
I do think I've always been really drawn to kids, and I really valued my time as a pediatric nurse, and I don't know, maybe in the future that's an area that I'll go back to because there is truly something profound in having taken care of a lot of kids at the end of their life, all ages. There is this openness, and it's like there's this other channel that they are so tapped into that I think we lose as adults. And so I think that's so true. And I think it's really special. And I love to get their perspective. And I've witnessed really young kids say things that they couldn't possibly understand or be
Yeah.
exposed to. And yeah, I think that's so beautiful that you've had those moments. And she is forever going to be an extraordinarily special young girl. And I'm so thankful that you're her mother and that
Thanks.
you are so willing to share this experience because for whoever's out there just sitting in the middle of it, just hold on to this conversation. And no matter which turn your story takes, maybe you'll find some inspiration in this conversation and know that there's life on the other side. And how I like to close all of these conversations is just with the thought, what if it all works out?
How it's supposed to.
Yeah.
And I think often what would have happened, just because it reminds me how grateful I am for everything that I learned, everything that we went through, and it reminds me to be grateful for every day. And every day I look at her, from getting her out of bed to going to the park to reading a book to going to bed. I tell her every morning, I missed you while you were sleeping. Because I do. I genuinely miss her when I'm not with her. It all worked out. And now she's the best big sister and she's a good girl. She's a very good girl.
Is there anything else that you want to leave anybody listening to this conversation with?
Trust your instincts. Trust your instincts and let people into your circle who are meant to be there. We really had to lean on some people for going through the worst possible situation. And that was really hard for both of us. We're very independent people, but we had to let them in. And that helped get us through it. Whether it's a stranger that went through something similar or whether it's a brother, a sister, a mom, or a dad, or whatever, find somebody to let in to help you. And if you do better with strangers, then seek out help, somebody to talk to.
There are a lot of resources out there in community, especially for NICU families. And sometimes, yeah, I think what you said, like the best connections you can make are with other people that truly actually know exactly what it's like to sit in that rocking chair at the bedside.
Or
And it's okay if that's not your mom or if it's not your sister or your spouse in moments. Sometimes you just need to be validated and hear from somebody who's been exactly where you are.
yeah.
And so I think that's really great advice. There's so much that came out of this conversation, and I hope it empowers people to be advocates for themselves and for their families. And I hope that it empowers healthcare professionals to take a step back sometimes and really take in someone else's perspective. And there's so much that is required and demanded of us as healthcare providers. And so I don't take that lightly either. I certainly never want to demonize
Yeah, no.
providers or nurses or RT or anybody in any of those levels because we get it. This is our profession too. And so we're just as guilty in moments. And there's so much learning that comes from being humble and taking a step back. And now that you are on both sides of the conversation, you are so well positioned to speak to this and to teach and make changes and help people on both sides of that to find the collaboration that these tiny babies and any kind of patient really deserves.
Yeah. I think it's made me a much better nurse
Yeah.
because I hear them. I was moonlighting and I took care of a laboring mom from start to finish, and she like recognized me in like their patient like customer satisfaction survey, because I think she was just so grateful for like how honest I was and how like much I listened to her. And I was like, I want this experience to be what you want it to be. So it's really shifted me from the mom I thought I would be to the mom I am, to the nurse I was, to the nurse I am now, to the wife I am.
Totally expanded you in every aspect of your life.
It did. It really did. And it's still changing me to this day with going through toddlerhood and being a mom of two. It's not all about her anymore. I have another baby to keep alive,
Yeah.
just in a different way.
That being said, I know your schedule is so full. You certainly have your hands full with the best blessings, right? And the best you've got your hands full. And I just really appreciate you taking time out of your day to share this with the world. And I feel really honored that you trusted me to have this conversation. And yes, this is a long episode, but it is so worth it. And every part of this story is amazing. And I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud to know you. And I'm at a loss for words. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.